In this video, we'll be reviewing key research conducted on women's sexuality over the last 100 years.
Sex has been male-oriented for thousands of years. Women's sexuality is subsumed by man's desire. The point of her sexuality is to attract and keep a man, plain and simple. A woman who is celibate or who is sexually attracted to another woman may be stereotyped undesirable. And a woman who enjoys her own sexuality is labeled a slut or something else equally unflattering. And these double standards are still pervasive today in the 21st century. Add to this the fact that girls and women are responsible for managing their sexual behavior, being good girls, being marriageable. It can be quite a feat. And females, unlike males, also have to consider the possibility of pregnancy before she is ready or even knows if she wants children at all. A lot has been said to manage and control women's sexuality. Humans have a long history of orgasm worship, and the veneration of the male orgasm goes without saying. And yet the way we've looked at the female orgasm is quite different. Up until the 1920s, stimulation to orgasm was considered a proper treatment for the symptoms of hysterical women. As a reminder, hysteria was the belief that a woman's uterus moved around her body when she got excited. I am not making this up, I wish I was. And so to reduce those hysterical symptoms, women went to clinics. It was a real lucrative combination of disease and treatment. Women were never cured, but they never died. And they kept coming back for treatment. Doctors got very tired of this treatment. Some of them got carpal tunnel, and hence we created the vibrator. So just from this one example, you can see that female sexuality became, in effect, a troublesome disease that required treatment.
We'll look at the work briefly of Mary Stopes, Alfred Kinsey and his colleagues, William Masters and Virginia Johnson, and Sherry Hite and the Hite Report.
Married Love, or Love in Marriage, is an academic book by Marie Stopes. It was one of the first books openly to discuss birth control. The book begins by stating that, quote, "More than ever today are happy homes needed. It is my hope that this book may serve the state by adding to their number." In Stopes' lexicon, love means sex, and access to the knowledge of how to curate it and cultivate it. Marie Stopes was the first female academic on the faculty at the University of Manchester and the youngest doctor of science in Britain. She was a paleobotanist and challenged the Victorian ideas that it was improper for women to enjoy sex. She also wrote about contraception. In fact, she was a proponent of the belief that waiting to conceive a child would result in a stronger relationship between husband and wife. Even though the book was controversial, it was a bestseller in England, and it was banned in the U.S. for obscenity for more than a decade. As with all research, there are limitations. This research was clearly done on heterosexual married love and sex, and did not open... And while Mary Stopes had some very progressive ideas in some areas, and was a proponent of women's rights, she was also a proponent of eugenics. One of the things that made Alfred Kinsey and colleagues' research so impactful and unique was the intensity of the interview process. One-on-one personal interviews may go on for hours or days. Kinsey analyzed data for the frequency with which women participated in various types of sexual activities and looked at how factors such as age, socioeconomic status, and religion and its adherences influenced her sexual behavior. Comparisons were made of female and male sexual activities, and Kinsey's evidence suggested that women were less sexually active than men. Whether that had to do with self-report, norms and mores of the time, or biological, it was incredibly taboo when it came out. It was shocking, there were threats, both because they challenged conventional beliefs about sexuality and because they discussed subjects that were previously considered to be much too taboo to be discussed. In regards to limitations and biases, Clearly, this was done at a university setting over a long period of time. Most of the respondents were white and educated, and they were people who chose to be interviewed to discuss their life stories. All of the other things that you know about surveys and interviews fall into this category as well. The sexual response cycle was pioneered by William Masters and Virginia Johnson in the 50s and the 60s. Started by the question that Dr. Masters had, which was, what does sex look like biologically, physiologically? What does the body do when one has sex? So they observed hundreds of individuals engaging in more than 10,000 episodes of sexual activity in their laboratory. Their findings indicated that the human sexual response could be described as a cycle with 4 distinct stages: excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution. Critics thought that Masters and Johnson, their research violated sacred grounds and dehumanized sexuality and turned it into bits and bytes. And yet they were also praised for advancing the understanding of human sexuality and dispelling misconceptions. They understand the phases of sex to be part of 2 processes: vasoconstriction and myotonia. So there were positives and negatives to their research, as there is to all types of research. The positives really debunked this notion of vaginal orgasm and debunked the idea that women who did not have orgasms were frigid. And perhaps the greatest positive was the breakthrough understanding that both men and women go through the same sexual steps, that male orgasms and female orgasms physiologically look the same. It was quite impactful and quite frightening, quite scary. The one difference, though, is that after orgasm, where men go through resolution and refraction, women do not need to. Women can go to orgasm again, from plateau to orgasm, from plateau to orgasm. So the negatives to this research? Well, as with Kinsey's research, it was an unrepresentative sample. They were people who were willing to go into a laboratory and be observed sexually. And it only focused on the physiology. And finally, we will look at the Hite report published in 1976 by Sherry Hite. A sexual revolution in 600 pages, it's been called. Over 100,000 women between the ages of 14 and 78 were asked what they do and don't like about sex, how orgasms really feel, with and without intercourse, how it feels not to have an orgasm during sex, the importance of clitoral stimulation and masturbation, and to name the greatest pleasures and frustrations of their sexual lives, and many other questions. Now, I want to make a point that 100 women responded to this report, and they responded from a page to 50, 60, and 70 pages. What we found was that the orgasm was easy and strong for women, given the right stimulation, and that most women have orgasms most easily during masturbation or clitoral stimulation by the hand. This 600-page report, this 600-page book, was the first to propose that sex is culturally created and not a biological given. Thus, the central theme of her work is to challenge society, quote, which has been a problem accepting and understanding women's sexuality, end quote. Because of this work, and for a very long time, Sherry Hite was the most hated woman in the world. She received so many death threats that she left the United States and moved to Germany and gave up her U.S. citizenship. That did not stop her work, though. In her updated report of the early noughties, a lot of things remain the same. Masturbation was the surest source of orgasm for both single and multiple orgasms. They rarely occurred during intercourse without additional stimulation. And most women were willing to accept sex with a man even if she didn't often have an orgasm with him. Lesbianism was a regular source of orgasm for a few women, but many more would like to try such a relationship. She talks about a need to destroy double standards. For example, the concept of the sexy woman in contrast to the sexy man are not respectable. In addition, it's clear that women would like to note that they would appreciate the pattern and definition of sex to include greater diversity. Sexual intercourse in and on its own is not enough. Women's desires and needs, not least in achieving orgasm more regularly, needs to be taken into account as we redefine sex and sexuality. By way of summary, Hite calls for a greater dissemination of data regarding the anatomical basis and the physiological ideology of the female orgasm, and emphasizing the role of the clitoris. In her revolutionary terms, she sees orgasm as a metaphor for women's power in society. These findings confirm those same of Freud, Kinsey, Masters, and Johnson, and make it clear that men not only need to take the clitoris seriously, but to ensure that its function is more regularly fulfilled in whatever the form of sexual congress.
And this concludes our review of key research on women's sexuality.